Thanks, everybody. So I'm Eleanor, and this is Tanya, and this is Joe, and we are the History in Place team. We started this project. Let me just get the slides. Yes, it's functioning. So this has been a fantastic partnership to start with, and I think this project is a great example of how when three different organisations come together around a clear structure that's going to benefit each of their skills and what they're looking to achieve, and it's been fantastic for us to do that. So aside from the project itself, it's a great way to think about collaborative models too. What we wanted to do is, when the Australian curriculum came out, look at ways to apply those general historical themes to very particular locations and places to connect kids with their local history. And also for Culture Victoria, we work with a range of collecting organisations across Victoria, how to connect some of those community museums with their local primary schools and increase their sort of ability to generate future audiences. So what we did was partnered together. We had funding from the Telematics Trust and also from Culture Victoria. And we developed this model, which we've been testing this year, to link the community museums with their local primary schools and have the kids come into the museums and create short films. And they do this within one day, so it's quite intense, but it's been fantastic. The project deliverables that we've aimed to achieve to partner, test it with 6 schools across remote Victoria, regional Victoria and metropolitan, so 2 schools in each of those areas, so across the state. We're going to develop out of this pilot session a toolkit that can be applied and utilised by anyone, so that it doesn't require us as facilitators to implement. And that toolkit will go up onto the Culture Victoria website. And it will include letters to approach schools. It'll include connections between the curriculum and the framework of historic themes, which comes out of the Heritage Council of Victoria. It links to apps for iPads and Android tablets. We've developed the model so that it can operate on existing technology, so it's really easy and simple to implement. It links to storytelling resources, a schedule of the day, 2 how-to films and a range of teachers' resources. So we've really set out to create a structure that anybody can use for free. We're quite happy to give it away. We were just really interested in looking at ways that we can get kids into museums using new technology to be engaged with history. So I'll now pass on to Tanya. As Darren mentioned, we're going to do in rounds to talk about the how it relates to the framework of historic themes.
Hi. So part of, for the Heritage Council, there were a couple of reasons why we were really keen to get involved in this. And one of them is, a couple of years ago, we developed something called the Victoria's Framework of Historical Themes. And a lot of you might know of the Australian historical themes, and this was really our attempt to make the historical themes relevant to Victoria. But equally, and so this project really draws links between the new Australian curriculum in history and the Victorian framework of historical themes. But equally, if other states are interested in using it as a pilot, they could use it based on the Australian historical themes, and there's very clear links. What we were really interested in is bringing out some creative and kind of practical uses of the historical themes. So rather than them just being used by heritage or historical experts, that they were being used in practical applications. The other thing that we were really interested in is last year or the year before, we developed an app which was about the Heritage Register in Victoria, and part of it was about user-generated content. So what we understood was that the app or the Heritage Register was really the official history of all the places that are registered in Victoria, and we were really interested in capturing the unofficial history. And so people can upload stories and also images of all the places on the register. And so a lot of the places that we used in the pilot are also represented on the app, and we're really keen in the kids understanding their own local history and using the app as a way to connect to the places that are relevant to them in their local area. And really that's one of the real themes of this project, is about a connection between kids and their local history, and how you kind of use technology to make the history of their local area seem more relevant to them. In terms of opportunities for cultural institutions, next slide.
You've got the slide.
I've got the clicker, sorry. There you go. So we are really interested in this about understanding kids as being multipliers. So for a lot of these are very small organisations that have run this project, and for a lot of them what was really, really interesting was that many of the local community had never been to these organisations, had never been to the local community museum, had never been to the Historical Society, whatever it was. And so we were really interested in how you use kids to then bring along their parents, kids as being multipliers. And a lot of the collecting organisations who have run the pilot are now looking at having a launch, and then the launch will invite the whole school and it will invite all of the kids' parents. And so all of these this community that's never been to this collection will suddenly be there. We're also interested in it as creating marketing collateral that the community museum can use. So they're going to have a range of films that have been created by the kids that they can use on their website. They can use as a loop in the foyer of their museum. There's, basically they're having these materials created for them for free. It helps the museum understand the collections through the eyes of kids. And it moves the collection. For a lot of these community museums, they don't necessarily have any kind of digital offerings as yet. And so really what this is doing is creating some digital offerings for them that they can use in the digital space. The other thing it does is it allows the kids to be creative with the collection. So rather than the school taking the kids on an excursion to the museum, the kids going on a tour for an hour and then leaving and having had a very, very passive experience of what that place has to offer, they're basically being asked to interpret the collection through the making of films, and that really shifts the power dynamic in that space. And so, it's, yes, it's allowing them to be active and creative with the collection. And the other thing is that what we're hoping is that it creates an ongoing relationship, so between the school and the community museum. And already out of the 6 pilots community museums that we did this year, a lot of them are thinking about running it next year. So if they worked with grade 5 this year at that school, then they'll work with next year's grade 5 next year. And so it's a way of forming a kind of ongoing relationship between the school and the community museum, and really kind of cementing that community relationship. Jo. Yeah.
Oh, my slides overlapped a little bit there. Well, I'm from the History Teachers Association of Victoria, and this has been a really exciting opportunity for us because traditionally we've resourced secondary teachers mostly because history is to be understood as a discipline of a secondary education, and something which has become a little bit diluted through the use of SOS over the last few years. But with the national curriculum, it gave the opportunity to identify history as a discipline in primary schools, which has been very, very exciting because it means that we get to work with primary teachers. And then, of course, we noticed there are huge holes in resources for history for primary teachers. And we've spent a lot of time working in focus groups and saying, what do you need? What's required of you? We've been out to regional areas and metropolitan areas and remote areas, and there were a few things which are coming through. The first was that teachers were looking at things in terms of literacy, inquiry and numeracy. So any history tasks needed to have quite a big focus on inquiry. And also that they wanted things which could also be used across composite classes, so for example 5-6, while also adhering to the different parts of the curriculum which allude to specific content. The Australian curriculum, which is really just being rolled out this year, some schools have tried it, some have not, is divided into skills and content. With the focus groups we've chosen, they've been grade 5 and grade 6 students because they're doing Australian history and they're doing particular time periods. So grade 5s are looking at the 1800s and grade 6s are looking at the 1900s. And of course that fits beautifully with a lot of community museums. Often they have collections for both, which means that you can use a grade 5-6 project, get both grade 5s and 6 students in there and just isolate objects to help them understand their particular era. The other thing that there was a big push towards was skills in history education, historical literacy, historical inquiry and historical thinking. And this project was very much based on the use of developing history skills as well as absorbing content. And as Tanya mentioned, it was very important for the learning to be very active And what we found has been very successful through a lot of competitions and a lot of projects is the idea of students making history, producing history, and also the idea of individual learning projects where they basically get to shape the content of their project. We actually moved across several different aspects of learning. With North Melbourne, we found they had quite a strong Italian program. And when we put out the call for teachers who were interested, it was an Italian teacher who responded. And we went, okay, great. And what it sort of moved into was a CLILS project where you're looking at some bilingual aspects. And some of the students actually did the films in Italian with subtitles. So you can see that there is a lot of flexibility, and really we kept the guidelines fairly open. As the project moved, we refined them, and in the toolkit that you'll get our refined version, whereas we learnt quite a bit across the way, particularly in making things remain in the area of history rather than more of a dramatic interpretation, because that sort of moved away from historical accuracy. So we found it very, very successful in terms of reaching both the skills and the content with grade 5. Okay, part of my slide's missing. That's all right. Part of the content is looking at things like frontier conflict, the gold rushes, the Eureka Stockade, farming drought. Many of you I can see are from cultural institutions who would have these stories in your collections. Also stories of immigration from Europe and Asia, and significant individuals. For example, we went to the Yarra Rangers Museum, which is very big on Dame Nellie Melba. So it was great for them. And as Tanya and Eleanor said, it's been great publicity for the museums. So they've now got this student work that they can use to advertise their collections. I'm going to speed through to grade 6. Grade 6, 1900s. Yet again, many of these stories are in larger and smaller collections. And yet again, the same themes, Indigenous collections, Federation, World War II, migration. And one of the skills that really showed up, and you can see on that slide, are things like sequencing. Digital stories, I'm using the iPads, is very much about putting things in order. Telling a story has to have a beginning, middle and end. It has to have a chronological sequence. Creating their own inquiry questions and developing texts. That was a really big one. I'm going to pass on to Eleanor to talk about the actual practice of the pilot.
Yes, so we're going to run through the schedule of the day and talk a little bit about the practical application, because as Jo said, things did change as we went along. It's been a great learning experience. But first of all, we'll just show a quick 2-minute video showing some of the days and what happened in the interactions between the kids and the museums.
Opportunity to take the history that they've learnt today, to look at the artefacts, and then to create their own dialogue around it to reinforce their own learning. And not only that, to then take it and then transform it into a project which will then be celebrated by so many other institutions and students as well. It's done in a way that they have a chance to integrate technology, which my students really enjoy doing.
I'm picking this blanket because it was made by a loom and it was made by a grass substance. But it just really kind of interested us because someone had soaked it in a river and then spun it into kind of woolly stuff. What was that for?
That's right. So Bowen Park and the National Trust are very keen to engage with younger people so that they can learn about their history and enjoy it. And I think this was a very positive way for children to do that.
They just loved it. They loved seeing all the old furniture and the belongings of the people that did live here.
The governess's room was next door. That was where she had her bedroom, and then this is where she would have taught the children.
It's only down the road from our school, so it was an amazing experience to be able to come and learn about the history. And I suppose to make the most of the history within your local community is more meaningful and real for those kids.
It's enriched their study by listening to people who are part of the history talk about the artefacts, how those artefacts related to their lives and their families. It's given history a place and a context and a story as well.
I like the fact that you find out how much the Italians have influenced the society. They've influenced so much, and we just take it for granted now. We don't really think about it that much when you're having a coffee or whatever.
It's been really interesting and fun.
So as you can see, there were some very Melbourne-centric kids there. You can also see there was a lot of hands-on action with the collections, so that was suitable for some of the museums. They were happy to bring out a range of their objects and let the kids touch them and play with them. Other museums, it was much more objects were kept behind the cabinet, so there was a bit of adjustment in terms of that with each institution that we went to and being adaptable to the needs of that organisation. This schedule of the day is where we stand at the moment, and it might adjust again slightly, but this is what we ended up with pretty much on the second pilot that we did. The first pilot, which was at the North Melbourne Primary School that you saw there with the Italian teacher. The kids were really keen to make stories about themselves. They all wanted to be the star. So we sort of learnt through that there were certain... we needed to give them some parameters, and one of that was introducing a storyboard process to the day. So what happened is the kids had come in. The museum would give a quick welcome to their museum. We'd then do an overview of what we were hoping to do with the day. We'd then give a short session about making a story using tablet technology. Now, you guys have probably all used tablet technology in things like iMovie or those sorts of apps that are out there that are so easy to create movies. And the kids, 11-year-olds, pick it up in 3 seconds. A lot of the kids had never used tablets before, and within literally 5 minutes they understand the layout of how the technology is working, so they then understand how to use it and create material. And they're very creative with it as well. So we gave a short sort of session on just things to think about with storytelling, a beginning, middle and end. It wasn't a strict digital storytelling structure in the strict sense of it. It was really just them creating a narrative that featured a few objects, sometimes just telling the story of a single object and then drawing out the broader history from that single object, or sometimes integrating 3 or 4 objects that related to a particular theme. And then often the kids would do short interviews with an expert from the museum, and some of them actually ended up going out into the community and doing interviews with people in the community that they knew were related to a particular story. We absolutely found that keeping it simple was the winning approach. You can't do that much in 2 to 3 minutes in a film, or to do something well, it's actually better to keep it very simple to get a clear outcome. So we really encourage them to think simply. And as Jo was saying, sequencing, what we found interesting was that the kids were very good at the initial idea and very good at starting the story, but they found it quite challenging how to wrap it up and how to finish it. So there were elements of that about guiding them through it. And what we've really thought about in terms of that feedback that we had through running it, and we'll also do some formal evaluation as well with the interviews with the schools and the organisations, what was I going to say? That we wanted to produce simple tools that will help them for this to be run without us in situ. So generally in terms of resourcing, we were there on the day. The museum had a couple of people, and then there were usually 2 teachers that came with the school as well. And we'd split in the afternoon, we'd do, or in the early morning, a tour around the museum where we encouraged the museum to think about key stories that they wanted to tell and focus on 3 or 4 key stories. Museum would do a tour, all the kids would go around, they'd select groups, so the kids worked in generally groups of 4 or 5. We had a couple of times where each student had an iPad. We worked with iPads, but it's fine across any other tablet, of course. And what we actually found, it was better if there was just one iPad per group. There was a bit of negotiation about who got to hold the iPad for most of the time, and it's very much about kids like justice, everyone gets a fair go. Is that 5 minutes or 2 minutes? 5, okay. Just checking. And we actually found it was better if there was one iPad per group. We found when every kid had an iPad, it became a very individual, and it became between their relationship and the iPad rather than them and the group. So there's some really interesting outcomes in terms of how this sort of technology works in our interrelationships with physical space and physical people too. So that's been a fascinating sort of outcome of the project. Then in the afternoon, the kids, we did storyboarding with them. We made it so that they had to be producers, or we were the producers, and they had to get their storyboard signed off by us, or they wouldn't get, the money to produce the film, and because everyone wants to be famous. So they storyboarded, and then the teams actually put the stories together. And the finished videos, a selection of those will go up on Culture Victoria, and what we'll also do is screen them at Federation Square on the big screen and have a launch. And we'll select the kids. But we'll just move on. Tanya's going to talk about some of the technology that we used, the apps.
That's already slightly been mentioned. We used iPads, but as we said, it could work on any tablets, and that was really just because the school pretty much, I think we did the pilot with 6 schools, and 5 of them had a class set of iPads in the class. So it just happened to be the technology that it seems to us that primary schools are buying. There was one school that didn't have access to any kind of tablet, so we hired them iPads. But obviously that was just because it was part of the pilot. But and we used iMovie, and we did talk a lot about kids becoming digital citizens, so responsible, not using things out of copyright. And so we did encourage them to make their own soundtracks, and we found that worked really well. So they were using GarageBand to make their own soundtracks, but that's time consuming. So we talked a little bit in the kind of morning session about, copyright and what it is to, with either images or with music. Yeah, as I said, as Eleanor said, what we found was even the kids who had never used tablets before had picked it up so quickly, that the technology really wasn't a problem. It was more of a concern with some of the teachers. So some of the teachers were a little bit apprehensive about using them, but the kids had picked it up so fast that didn't become a problem. In terms of resourcing and experience, as we said, for the pilot, we had the 3 of us here. And what we found is it's really good to have have the kids broken up into the same number of groups as there are adults who are able to supervise. So in the afternoon, we found that the groups really did need a bit of supervision. And so if there were 2 teachers that came and 2 people from the museum, then you'd break the kids into 4 groups, and that would work fine. But they really do need a little bit of hand-holding along the way. Yep. And then...
So as you can see, it did go quite well. This was an unsolicited feedback that one of the students left on one of the tablecloths. It was a paper tablecloth. That's all right. But really, I suppose what we wanted to achieve was something that teachers would be excited about and students would be excited about. We call it a rich task. It's very. It covers a lot of different aspects. It's not easy. It does require the work, but it was very enjoyable, and the product was well worth the effort. And I suppose our message to you today is that we would like you to take this project, and we would very much like that that you make those connections with schools. I think most of you here from cultural institutions and other organisations. Is there anyone here who's from a school? A couple, great. Primary schools? Great, fantastic. We would like you to team up. So we would love to get the conversation. So it might be that some of the teachers would like to approach a cultural institution, or that the cultural institutions put out calls to the local schools to try and really get students involved. As everyone said, it's up there for the taking. What we do ask is that you do let us know how it's going. So we have... There we go. We actually are quite active on Twitter, and we've been tweeting about every place that we've been to since we began the project. And so please do follow along, and you can check back over the History in Place hashtag. Now, I suppose in terms of next steps, Eleanor has just really quickly told us, we're going to be running a support session, and we are actually presenting at a few different conferences, particularly the History Teachers Association conference in Victoria, which is a primary conference at the Melbourne Museum. Please do come along, even if you're from interstate, because we do find we have a lot of interstate visitors as well. Please tweet us if you'd like to be involved, and everything's up on the web. Am I forgetting anything?
I should just say, yeah, the toolkit's not actually on the web
yet.
It will
be.
But it will be mid-September. So, and then we'll run support sessions around then. So if you're interested in running it, get in touch, and then we can talk about how we can support you to do that. And again, we've designed it to roll out nationally, potentially.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Yes. I want to congratulate you, firstly. I think this is enormously exciting, and it's something we've all been... People involved in community museums, we know that the majority of Australian collections sit in that space, but they're terribly under-resourced and sometimes rather boring. And I think everybody's been waiting for something that makes the link. And you've done it. And not only have you done it, but you're saying you're going to show everybody else how to do it.
That would be presumption.
So it's fantastic. I do have to ask a question.
Yes, of course.
Did you find any resistance in the community museums to this idea?
Hello. Look, we chose the 6 community museums that we piloted with. We chose specifically because for the pilot we wanted to represent a range of different types of community museums with different types of collections, and so we actually approached those ones, and they were very enthusiastic about being part of it. In fact, of the 6 that we approached, we ended up running with all 6 of them. So there weren't any who said no. But having said that, we presented at the Museums Australia conference a couple of months ago, and there was a lot of interest at that. But we haven't really, as we said, once the toolkit's online, we will actually put the call out in a general way and see who's interested in running it next year. So that might be where we see, what the interest is in a broader sense. But yes.
It's interesting you should bring that up, because what we found, it was a little bit more difficult to schedule with schools, because with the national curriculum it's actually larger than the time allowed. So we have to really sell it as something that will facilitate all these other aspects. And often schools kind of went, it sounds a bit difficult. So that was, I suppose, where the scheduling problems lay a little bit. It was about getting the schools to commit. The museums were very into it.
Say something else about that, which is just what we did find though is that some of the smaller community museums are nervous about not having the skills to run it, and so that's why we're really trying to work with the toolkit to make it as specific as possible, so that it really does say, look, here it is all laid out for you. You really don't need any in-house expertise except a willingness to share the collection, and ideally someone who is good with kids. So to have a volunteer or a staff member or an education officer ideally, but a lot of them obviously don't have that, but just somebody who's keen to engage with kids and is able to kind of explain the collection in a way that's engaging for kids to kind of be able to pull at bits of the collection and go, I'm interested in that, I want to make a film about that. So that, as we said, it was well received, but there's a little bit of nervousness about not being able to resource it. So we're trying to make that as easy as possible.
Okay.